රෝස සුවඳ තවත් තිකු කලක් රැඳෙන්න ඩබල් පර්ෆියුම් ලුක් සමගින් එන නව සන්ලයිට් රෝස්.
Tonight, no silver bullet. As Sri Lanka achieves provisional vaccination target, health experts urge immunisation to reduce transmission.
If you happen to get infected, the amount of virus that you have, you are potentially transmitting to somebody, there's less density of the virus.
And insists that the jab alone won't do the trick.
Interrupting transmission of this virus has to be vaccines and all the other things that we're doing.
Left field solution. The government expecting $2.6 billion in inflows in the coming months and looking at alternatives other than loans.
We are looking at new inflows to the country, which is the utilization of underutilized assets. And I'm sure that we will be able to rake in at least $400 million.
Time to be serious. Certain health guidelines to be made into laws on Monday. First of its kind. Rapid PCR testing made available at the BIA.
Please remember, you have to come here 4 hours before the departure of the flight, because normally to take this rapid PCR test, it takes about 1 hour. Within 1 hour, you can get that test done.
All that and much more coming up on First at 9. This Saturday, the 14th of August, 2021.
කට උත්තර නැති වෙන්න කලින් සිග්නල් ඩීප් ක්ලීන් එකකට මාරු වෙන්න.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhamma Kekanai. Now, State Minister of Money, Capital Market and State Enterprise Reforms, Ajit Cabral, says that the government is looking into non-debt type inflows, such as utilisation of underutilised assets, to source some of the inflows over the coming months. In a recent interview, he noted that about $400 million is expected in that fashion, with the capacity for that figure to rise even as further as $1 billion. All this, he says, will ensure that the country's financial position and go towards ensuring that Sri Lanka maintains its impeccable record on debt repayment.
We are very confident of avoiding any such default. We have been regularly making sure that all payments that are due are met without any default whatsoever. We have an impeccable record. And if you look at the track record of Sri Lanka in the recent past, we even went to the extent of bringing in certain import restrictions in order to conserve the foreign exchange that we have in order to be able to make the payments that are due. We have had some difficulty and challenges as a result of the tourism receipts being not there. That has been a big difficulty for us. But at the same time, the adjustments that we have made within the economy have been sufficient to ensure that the payments are made. So each year we have had challenges, but each year we have dealt with it in such a way that we are able to make ends meet and ensure that Sri Lanka's impeccable record is maintained.
While stating that the government is expecting around $2.65 billion in inflows over the next 3 months, State Minister of Money, Capital Markets and State Enterprise Reforms, Ajit Cabral, elaborated on the venues from which the government expects to secure those inflows.
Some are swaps. Actually, we have already worked out some swaps with the Bangladesh Bank as well as the Reserve Bank of India, and those will materialize shortly. We are also getting about $800 million from the IMF on the SDR facility. That has been the new allocations that have been done. So that's an important inflow that we are going to have. We are also having a new area that we are looking at new inflows to the country, which is the utilization of underutilized assets. There are quite a number of Sri Lankan assets that we have not been able to use to generate inflows, but now we are very effectively attending to that, and I'm sure that we will be able to rake in at least $400 million, and if we are on the right track on that, we'll probably be able to even realize about $1 billion. So those will be inflows that are non-debt type, and I'm sure that that will be very helpful in making our ends meet. At the same time, we are also working very eagerly on the increase in our exports. The exports, as far as the normal exports are concerned, are being generated as usual. But in addition, the exports per se in relation to the gems as well as remittances are also showing strong improved indications of going up. And that's something that we'll be working on very effectively over the next few months. So we are confident of having enough monies coming in. And at the same time, it's a question of how you deal with the cash flows. And that's very important for us to be keeping a very close eye on. And you can be sure that Sri Lanka will be doing that to ensure that the payments due are met.
අද සේවසකට වැඩි ජනතා විශ්වාසය නව සංයෝගයකින් රයිනෝ රෝෆිං සහ සීලිං ෂීට්.
Then the government has hit its target of partially vaccinating those above 30 years of age, but there still remains thousands who have not opted for the jab against COVID-19. Undue fears and misinformation about inoculations have played a part in the vaccination reluctance, with some even questioning the purpose of it altogether, citing the possibility of contracting the virus even after vaccination. Health experts, meanwhile, highlight the obvious benefits of the jab, but insist that vaccination alone will not do the trick. The government, meanwhile, has decided to purchase 100 metric tons of oxygen from India next week for COVID treatment.
As things stand, at least on paper, Sri Lanka has vaccinated its estimated population of over 30s. Based on the statistics from last year, it has been estimated that there are 11.4 million people above the age of 30 in the island. The aim was to give this section of society at least the first dose of a COVID vaccine by September. And as of last evening, 11,762,653 had been covered with the first dose. But in reality, at ground level, things are a little different. Though first dose administrations in most districts have gone beyond 100%, there remains thousands who are yet to be vaccinated. So how can this be? Undue fears and subscribing to false narratives about vaccination seem to be at the heart of it. Whatever you may come across in media, the stance of the Global Authority on Health on vaccination against COVID-19 is very clear.
People have seen the results from the clinical trials of anywhere in the 80% range, 90% range of efficacy. But that doesn't mean that 100% of people, 100% of the time, are going to be protected against disease. There is no vaccine that provides that level of protection for any disease. So we do expect in any vaccine program that there will be rare, but there will be cases of disease among people who were fully vaccinated, and certainly among some people who were partially vaccinated. This doesn't mean that the vaccines aren't working. What it does mean is that not everybody who receives vaccines has 100% protection. It's so important to get vaccinated because these vaccines are really effective, and it gives you a really good chance of not developing disease.
Both first and second doses of a COVID vaccine were rolled out yesterday as well, totaling 373,661. Among it were 22,939 first doses of the Covishield vaccine and 1,086 of its second dose. Meanwhile, the first dose of the Sinopharm vaccine was administered to 66,722 people and 276,476 people were given its second dose, fully immunizing them. 164 Pfizer first doses and 6,274 of its second dose were also administered yesterday. So far, from the 11.7 million people inoculated with at least the first dose, 4.3 million are fully inoculated. But what is clear is that infection of COVID-19 even after being fully vaccinated, which WHO calls breakthrough infections, is possible. Then, what can be expected in such a scenario?
So we're learning a couple things about breakthrough infections. The first is that the degree of severity of disease among people who have a breakthrough infection is less severe than the severity of disease among people who aren't vaccinated. So vaccines are operating in a couple of different ways. First, of course, they're preventing people from getting disease at all. And even when disease does occur among people who are fully vaccinated, the severity of that disease is less. And there's a couple things I want to say about breakthrough infections. The first is that they are uncommon, and so this is not something that's happening in an unexpected way. But they don't happen equally among all different kinds of people. People who are at increased risk of disease. So people with frail immune systems, people who are in older age groups, they have a greater risk of having breakthrough disease than other people. So it's not an equal risk of breakthrough disease. The second point here is that we're seeing more cases of breakthrough disease in part because people are stopping the other interventions that reduce the transmission of this virus. So when the virus starts to transmit at a greater and greater pace and with greater frequency, there's a lot more exposure that everybody has, including people who are vaccinated.
In the meantime, Sri Lanka confirmed new infections in the excess of 3,000 for a second consecutive day yesterday. The last time there was such a volume of fresh infections was back on the 5th of June. The epidemiology unit put yesterday's caseload at 3,152. A majority of them were recorded from the Western Province with 1,416. Its three districts, Colombo, Kaluthara and Gampa, were at the top of the districts-based infections as well, confirming 640, 529 and 247 new cases, respectively. As COVID numbers rise, bed space also become critical. It is just as well that there are 2,717 COVID recoveries today, taking the island's overall tally to 307,345. There have also been 2,473 fresh infections confirmed in the islands so far today, taking the number of active cases to 35,150. As the world struggles to contain COVID-19, the words herd immunity continues to divide opinion. The thinking of some countries was that exposing their populace to the virus would develop an antibody response among people, with the rate of transmission expected to drop. Since then, the WHO has promoted the idea of herd immunity through vaccination, as it is against the deliberate exposure of people to the virus. However, speaking during an interview recently, director of the Oxford Vaccine Group, Professor Sir Andrew Pollard, contradicted the WHO's theory on herd immunity.
I think we are in a situation here with this current variant where herd immunity is not a possibility because it still infects vaccinated individuals. And I suspect that what the virus will throw out next is a variant which is perhaps even better at transmitting in vaccinated populations. And so that's even more of a reason not to be making a vaccine program around herd immunity. If anything, we need to focus now not on what might stop new variants, because I don't think we have any facility to control that. We need to focus on thinking about how do we prevent people dying or going to hospital. We have now over 4 billion doses deployed of the vaccines globally, and that is now enough doses to have prevented almost all of those deaths, and yet they are continuing.
So the realities of vaccination are that it reduces chances of severe disease or death. The results on its own is enough to convince most. But another reality is that a vaccinated person can also pass on the virus to another. So why vaccinate when people can individually protect themselves by just adhering to the health and safety guidelines?
Vaccines reduce the transmission of the infection of the virus from one person to the next. And the way that vaccines do that is in a number of different ways. The first is they can protect you against getting infected at all. The second way that they work is if you become infected, you're actually shedding that virus for a shorter period of time than if you weren't vaccinated. And the third way that vaccines work is if you happen to get infected, the amount of virus that you have in your nose, in the back of your throat, that you're shedding and potentially transmitting to somebody is less of the virus. There's less density of the virus in you, and so less risk that you transmit it to somebody else. And what is so critical is interrupting transmission of this virus has to be vaccines and all the other things that we're doing, especially while people are still in the process of getting vaccinated. So now really isn't the time for us to reduce those other interventions while we're living in communities that don't have substantial vaccination yet.
Minister of Health Pavitra Vanniyarachchi announced today that certain health guidelines laid down by the Director General of Health will be made into laws. This is expected to be put into effect via an extraordinary Gazette notification on Monday.
The Task Force on the Prevention of the Spread of COVID-19, which convened under the patronage of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, decided to impose inter-provincial travel restrictions for a period of 2 weeks yesterday. The decision was made taking the country's current COVID-19 situation into account. Accordingly, the only people able to cross provincial borders are those employed in the banking, agricultural, apparel and tourism sectors, as well as those engaged in essential services, including healthcare, ports and airports. As such, vehicles attempting to cross provincial borders came under the scrutiny of police and the army personnel. People without the necessary documentation to prove their ability to travel between the provinces were sent back. Police media spokesperson Senior DIG AdaDerana meanwhile said that the police will be deployed and stationed at every entry and exit point of the Western Province. In addition, police and Triforces personnel also cracked down on individuals who didn't comply with the health and safety guidelines. Yesterday, 151 people had been arrested for violating quarantine regulations. Meanwhile, the task force had also announced that heads of private and public sector institutions have the authority to summon staff living outside the relevant province to work. However, the employees of the private sector should be called to work while adhering to the health and safety guidelines while considering the space at the place of work. In other developments, Minister of Health Pavitra Vaniarachi said that certain health guidelines issued by the Director General of Health Services will be declared as laws. An extraordinary gazette notification in this regard is expected to be published on Monday, the 16th of August. The Health Minister made these remarks addressing a media briefing held this morning.
Now then, rapid PCR testing is made available at the Bandaranaike International Airport in view of Sri Lankan travellers intending to visit the United Arab Emirates. It was made mandatory for travellers to have a PCR test within 4 hours before departure by the Gulf state, and the move addresses that requirement. The facility is also the first of its kind in the island.
On the 5th of August this year, the United Arab Emirates lifted the ban imposed on passenger arrivals from several countries, including Sri Lanka and India. However, only several categories of passengers from these countries were allowed to arrive in the UAE. That includes passengers with valid residency visas vaccinated with both doses of a COVID-19 vaccine in the UAE. The second dose had to be administered 14 days prior to arrival, and vaccination certificates approved by official authorities in the UAE were also a must. The vaccination status, however, was not relevant to medical personnel working in the country and those in the educational sector. However, anyone arriving in the UAE is required to submit a PCR test done within 48 hours from the date of departure. What's more, those passengers also require rapid PCR tests done 4 hours prior to departure, with the latter proving to be a possible obstacle to would-be travellers to the UAE. The Airport and Aviation Services has established a rapid PCR testing facility at the Bandaranaike International Airport, and it was officially unveiled today. It is also the first of its kind in the island.
This information is specially for the passengers. Please remember, you have to come here 4 hours before the departure of the flight, because normally to take this rapid PCR test, it takes about 1 hour. Within 1 hour, you can get that test done. So you have to come here at least 5 hours before in that case, and come and get this facility and get your test done. Within 1 hour, you will be given the certificate. So you have to take that certificate and go to the terminal and go ahead with your normal procedure. According to our government requirements, they charge 7,500 rupees for this, and balance all the facilities are provided by the Airport and Aviation Sri Lanka Limited free of charge. When they come here, they are given the facility to park their vehicles. They have to wait at a specific area until such time they get their results. You have been guided properly. When you come to the airport, you will be taken to the correct area.
We will see you shortly on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, the chairman of the Export Development Board, Suresh Dimel, is confident that Sri Lankan organic exports can successfully cater to the world's best markets, such as the European Union and the United States, whilst attracting premium prices. Addressing a webinar recently, he also outlined the necessity to avoid media negativity, which can possibly pose a threat to the country's initiative to go 100% organic, which the entire world is now focusing on.
We are looking at a 4 to 5 year plan when Sri Lanka can be organically certified. Although we are going into chemical free today, everyone is not organically certified. There is more criteria that needs to be adhered to before we get organic certification for all our agriculture. But the good news is that we are now in the viewfinder. Everybody is talking about Sri Lanka, and that Sri Lanka is going to be 100% agriculture. Now we have to market it properly. Now this this is where we have to have a 3-4 year marketing plan for this. The moment last week when there was a newspaper headline to say that we had reversed on that idea, I mean, that was what the media portrayed. Yes. And customers told about it before I realized about the headline. So you can see that those customers are watching us. So we must be careful now not to sort of shoot ourselves in the foot, because it's very important that we keep a good image for Sri Lanka and take some of the negativity out of the media so that we can legitimately be the cleanest country for food in the world. We are an island. We are geographically perfectly set up for 100% chemical-free agriculture. We will have short-term issues that we might have to subsidize and adjust, but we have to go for 100% chemical-free. It may take a little time, but not 20 years. I don't think in 2, 3, 4 years we need to clean up completely. And then, of course, the whole island will be chemical-free. And at that time, the demand in Europe, I mean, I heard compliance and certifications and things are going to be tougher for agricultural exports to the EU, and same with the US and other places. So we can cater to that market ideally. And there is no reason why we shouldn't be able to get premium prices, and that will go to our farmers. And then that will improve our whole economy.
While praising Sri Lanka's move to go 100% organic, CEO of the European Institute for Asian Studies Axel Goethals highlighted the importance of improving different levels in the production process to ensure the quality of produce.
It's a very good idea. Sri Lanka should go, of course, in that way, but it's not only chemical-free, but there is also another issue with organic food. That means it's not because it's organic, it should be also good quality of food. And still in the organic industry, there is a lot of work done already on organic certification, but people then get the illusion that the quality of the product is also good. And that's not always the case yet. There is still a lot of work to be done on that. And I think also Sri Lanka should go, of course, to organic production and farming, but it should also focus on, I would say, top quality of products. And it's not only the farming, but also the processing industry, which should really also focus on top quality. So all the different levels in the production processes should focus on improvement. And it's not only production of the product, but it's also the labor conditions. And it was mentioned that labor legislation in Sri Lanka is sometimes too stringent and too strict. Some flexibility could be a solution.
Now, errant behavior in the presence of wild animals is simply asking for trouble, especially when elephants are concerned. These gentle giants can turn on anyone if they feel threatened. And that's exactly what happened in Mahava and Putlam. One person was trampled to death, while another is in hospital with life-threatening injuries.
An elephant thought to be around the age of 3 had fallen into a well in the area of Karuwalagahavatta in Mahava. The calf was rescued today with the involvement of the residents in the area. Confused and afraid, the elephant calf turned on the onlookers following its rescue. A 55-year-old, however, fell into the elephant's grasp and the man was trampled to death. Meanwhile, a similar incident was reported in Puttalam today. Residents in the area of Udapur had been wary of a bull elephant which had been roaming in the area since last night. They attempted to chase the elephant away from the area today, with the people seen taking risks by approaching the elephant, disgruntled by the noises made by the people. One such individual could not make his escape as the traumatized animal turned on them. He was left with life-threatening injuries and was admitted to the National Hospital in Colombo.
And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.